We waited a long time for this. We've talked about it. We finally got there, and now we've got the 12-team playoff, and it gets going in just a little bit. No TJ today, a little under the weather. So me and Vegas Mac are going to hold it down. And what a weekend, not just the college side, Mac. We've got some key NFL games on Saturday as well. Tomorrow might be the greatest day of watching football all season. How the hell are you, buddy?
Man, I'm doing good, man. Sorry TJ's not going to be with us tonight. Got a lot of good things. Hey, Mike, listen, I got to start the show. I got to go off the rails already. Okay, I'm going off the rails already.
We haven't been on for a minute yet.
I know, but I got to. Listen. You know, I'm a New England guy. You know, I went to school in Vermont, and Monday night something special happened. It's different kind of football, soccer football. UVM, University of Vermont, won their first ever national championship in soccer. And I got to send a shout out to the Catamounts. Congrats, man. Like, that was so cool to see.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, obviously some of our listeners, familiar with the area, but to the people that aren't, like, that's a big deal there. And I, not much of a soccer fan. I watch when the World Cup's on and everything, but like, that's a special moment that those guys are going to remember forever, and just an incredible thing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I saw that too last week, and I'm like, I know Mac's going to have something to say here.
Oh yeah, that is so cool. I mean, I spent so many summers, up in Burlington. My dad is from Burlington area. My grandparents lived up there. We went to Lake Champlain. My grandpa worked at the museum up there. I mean, I spent so many summers up in Vermont. It was so much fun. So I'm so glad for those guys.
Yeah, and we get into, speaking of fun, man, I can't wait for just a few hours from now. We're going to try and take you right up to kickoff. Notre Dame and Indiana get the college football playoff started. ESPN broadcasting a game in Notre Dame Stadium. That just by itself is going to be pretty friggin' incredible. But now we're into it. The time for talking, to use every coach speak cliche that you can, the time for talking is over, and we're here. The cool thing is we've got football on right now. We've got the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl going on as we speak, and that'll take us kind of right up into it, man. I can't wait. We can throw out all the superlatives, Mac, but I'm really happy with the matchups we got. I think there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, we'll uncover that, but we're not going to waste any time. We're going to do the damn thing tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing is there's each of these matchups in this first round are so different. I mean, as I was kind of going through it, I kind of almost every time like, I think this team could win. I think this team could win. And I think that's the best thing about it. I do want to bring up another thing before we get started. And I was thinking about this. Home field advantage. Is it home field advantage? We talked a little bit about this last week, and I was trying to find a way to like put it together. And if you think about the basketball tournament, remember when basketball went to 64 teams and we're like, oh man, when is a 16 going to be the number one? Or when is a 15 going to lose to a number two? And it was always that pressure of if that could happen. And right. I just want to throw it out to you, Mike. What do you think about these teams that are hosting this first game? Do you want to be the first team to lose at home?
I think it's an interesting dynamic, and I think it goes game by game. I mean, let's before we go into our full preview here, you've got Indiana and Notre Dame, obviously in-state competitors, not far from each other. So you've got that dynamic there. The Irish with the home game. I think this is exactly what you wanted from a college football standpoint, like a meaningful playoff game on Notre Dame's campus. And then when you look at some of the other ones, I think it's actually a detriment to Ohio State because of what's been going on with the Buckeyes when it comes to premier big-time games, beating Michigan, beating Oregon, things that they haven't been able to do. I think at Ohio State's standpoint, it could backfire immediately, and we talked about this in length last week. If that team, which starts slow that we've documented, if they start slow with coming into this game with the last thing people saw in Columbus, oh my God, Ryan Day is going to hate his life. So I think in the other two games, Penn State really trying to go for the whiteout motif. It doesn't really have the same pop, if you will, when being such an early game. The Clemson Texas game, same thing there. But yeah, you've talked about this dynamic a lot this year about the games on campus and the home field advantage. I love it. I wish it would extend maybe a little bit longer, but you can't really do it in this format because you're not going to take the Rose Bowl out of the mix. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and I was just like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how that actually plays out. I'm curious to see, like you said, Ohio State's a good example because they're a slow starter. How's that crowd going to react? And, is it one of those things where, all of a sudden they get behind, and not just Ohio State, any of the home teams, does the crowd just kind of get and start sitting on their hands a little bit and start to go, oh my gosh, could we lose this game? So it'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting dynamic to see.
Yeah, and again, the schedule couldn't be set up any better. I mean, we're going wall-to-wall football. We're going to circle our way backwards as we start to get into these game previews. We'll go to the Notre Dame-Indiana game. Again, we're trying to take you right up to kickoff here. So let's start in Happy Valley, Mac. An interesting matchup here. We've talked about this a lot. SMU, the 11 seed, against the 11-2 as well, Penn State Nittany Lions. We've talked about it. It's been well documented. James Franklin in big games, over-under hovering around 52.5. Penn State still holding the line at about an 8.5-point favorite here. I don't know what to make of this matchup, A, because where the hell did Penn State's offense come from, like we talked about last week in the Big Ten title game? And B, I don't think a lot of people spent a lot of time watching this SMU team. They are physical, man. They love to beat the shit out of you at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah, this is an interesting game. I think one thing we have to kind of look at too is the weather is going to play a role in this game. Mm-hmm. Good chance of snow. It's going to be cold. So let's kind of start there. Who does that help? I think I'm going to take one step back before I do that. Let's talk about SMU. I mean, they've literally come back from the dead. I mean, and I don't know how many people know that. I mean, you should. This is a program that was given the death penalty. And they've come back and now look, they have a chance to play, first year in a new conference, get to play, for a national championship in the tournament. I mean, I think it's a great story. For me, the key on this and the number one thing is going to be Penn State. Is that offense going to be what we saw against Oregon? Their offensive line is really, really good. We know that. Yeah. If that Penn State offensive line can control things, and if the weather is what we think it might be, some snow, 70% chance of snow, cold, I think that's going to give Penn State that little bit of advantage, especially on the offensive line, to maybe control the tempo. And that's what this is about, because one thing SMU wants to do is they want to have the tempo in their favor. So this game for me is about who can control the tempo in this game.
Yeah, and you break it down to cold weather game. What do we usually see? We're going to see, you would think, a lot of running, and we know Penn State wants to ground and pound anyways, but SMU can do it right back with them. I mean, Brashard Smith, 1,270 yards, almost 6 yards a carry this year, 14 touchdowns on the ground. We know about Kevin Jennings' dual threat ability. He's averaging 4.1 a carry, and LJ Johnson Jr., at 4.1 a carry. So I think when it comes down to what you would expect to see in a cold weather game, if we're going to ground and pound, we're going to play physical football, I think this is a dead even matchup.
Yeah, and what I was looking at in this game, Drew Aller, he's going to come back next year. He said one of the things where he's really, really good is throwing between the hashes. And who does he throw to there a lot? Tyler Warren. One of the problems that SMU has had this year, and I didn't even realize this is one of their weak spots on defense, they've given up a lot of yards to tight ends. And so that's going to be a matchup. That's the key matchup. I put my big old star next to that one. That's the key matchup that I want to see. Can SMU stop that short in the hash passing game, especially with Penn State, their ability to use their tight ends?
Yeah, and for SMU, the cool part of the SMU dynamic to me is they're paying their way to play in the ACC. They're not getting any of the revenue sharing cuts here for a little while, as Stanford and Cal as well, in coming into the conference. So that dynamic, I think, is really interesting here. And obviously, no shade on Clemson. They won the conference championship. But I think when you look at the ACC standings, I think a lot of people would tell you that SMU's been the best team all season long. When you look at SMU's schedule, who'd they lose to? They lost to BYU 18-15, an ugly game. and they've pretty much cruised through, but they haven't really played anybody extremely difficult. At the same time, 11-2 is 11-2. We see it all the time. You can go out and play just a turd of a game against anybody. I mean, they really didn't have a close call, if you will. I mean, the Boston College game, that was a 10-point game, but it really wasn't that close. And they had to try and come from behind, and they almost did against Clemson. But the rest of their games, I mean, 66 they hung on TCU, 42 taking it easy on Florida State, 34-27 at Louisville. There was another close game in there. I really think when it comes down to it, and I look at this matchup, it's a coaching kind of unknown because there's a lot of people that still don't know a whole lot about Rhett Lashley, and he's done a fantastic job. And we know what James Franklin's kind of track record is in these games. And for me, I just don't trust Penn State under his direction because of it being a big game. I'm taking SMU, and I'm taking the 8.5 points if you're going to give it to me. I think this is going to be the closest game of all of the first-round matchup games.
Yeah, I mean, you look at all the numbers. Penn State 3-5 in their last 8 bowl games. We know what they've done in the big games, or haven't done in the big games. And that's, that's one of the things that I put right at the beginning of my notes. I said, can they finally win a big game? And this is a big game, and it's a big game at home. I've loved SMU all year. I mean, you know that. My biggest concern for them is, can they handle the power of that Penn State offensive line? That's the biggest thing. SMU hasn't really played a team that has, I think, the power. Also, Penn State defensively a lot better than we think. Overall, 6th in the nation. So this is a really good defensive team for Penn State. I'm actually might go in the opposite way. I think Penn State actually wins this game. I agree with you. I think it's going to be a close game, but I think in the end, I think the fact that Penn State doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot, they don't do a lot of things to hurt themselves. What sold me on Penn State, and I know we've kind of joked about it, but the way they played against Oregon, it was a loss, but that looked like a different team to me. They won me on that game against Oregon.
Yeah, and of course, the winner will move on to the Fiesta Bowl out here in Arizona against Boise State. Let's move onward in the bracket, if we will. And we've got another interesting matchup when we break it down. And again, the way this thing just happened to lay out with the quality of the NFL games that we have as well. Clemson and Texas from Austin. The Longhorns come in at about a 12-point favorite. You can find it a little bit lower. Over-under on this one's 51.5. And for me, and it's kind of been a show thing. We've talked about it over the course of the last few weeks. Is Texas a better football team with Arch Manning in? It sounds like Quinn Ewers is thinking about coming back, and Texas has said, hey, we're ready to move forward with Arch Manning. They're not going to make him sit any longer. You risk losing him. So can Quinn Ewers make the throws in this game? And on the other side, the signal caller for Clemson, Kate Klubnik, has had a fantastic year. And Clemson's a weird team because we left them for dead after week 1, national TV. They get blasted, and here they are.
One thing that stood out to me when I'm looking at this is Clemson's defense. Their turnover margin this year is a plus 16. That has to scare me a little bit with the trouble that Texas has had offensively a little bit. When do they make that change, or if they make that change, is going to be interesting to see. We saw it with Georgia last week, right? Or a couple weeks ago. They take out the starter because of injury or whatnot, and all of a sudden that was a different team. Is this going to be a different team when Arch Manning is in there? I'm really worried about this game for Texas. Texas it's been one of those teams that, man, some weeks they look like national championship bound, and then other weeks, man, you just scratch your head. They've been really inconsistent lately. For me, I think the team in orange is going to win.
Way to go out on a limb. We're not at best bets yet. That's the kind of garbage I expect out of you there. Another thing in this matchup too is and it's a little deceptive because if you look at his last handful of games, 28 yards, 66, 14, 17. Those are the yardage totals in the last 4 games for Phil Maffa of Clemson. But we've seen this, and anybody that's watched Clemson play this year, he is very capable at any point of going absolutely off. For example, like he did against Virginia Tech, 26 carries for $128. I think if they can get Maffa back in sync with their defense that you just alluded to, he's a guy that can really be a game changer in this game. He's averaging 5.2 yards a carry on 1,100 yards for the year. That being said, the last 4 weeks, they haven't been able to get him going. I think if Maffa gets going early, Clemson's dangerous in this spot because Dabo, we can bust his balls all the time about the transfer portal and how he doesn't use it and all that stuff. Dabo's got a lot of experience in these settings and in this position. Now, this is a different tournament, but Dabo's one of the coaches in this tournament that has a lot of experience in these games.
Yeah, one of the things that stands out to me, though, I look at their record this year against ranked opponents. Clemson is 1-3, Texas is 4-0. To me, that kind of pushes this a little bit more in the favor of Texas for me. Clemson's been really good. They were starting to make that run into the top 10, kind of had another loss, pushed them back. I just think from my standpoint, I think Texas's defense is what's going to win them this game. I don't think it's going to be their offense. I think Texas is going to win this game because of their defense.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing about handicapping these this year with it being new and the home field advantage component to it. And TJ brought it up last week. He's like, if this was a neutral site game, I'd be a little more lean towards Clemson. I'm going to lean Clemson because I got them at plus 12. Right. I understand comparatively speaking, when you look at these two teams, Texas is the better team, but the experience from Dabo Swinney, the way that Klubnik's played, if they can get Maffa going, you're going to give me 12 points. I'm going to take it because, again, you brought it up at the top of the show. We don't know what to expect with these home field advantage playoff games. This isn't week 3 in September. This is the playoffs. You win or you go home. And for me, an experienced coach, and we just talked about James Franklin and his record in big games, an experienced coach in this setting, if you're going to give me 12 points, and I'm not 100% sold on Quinn Ewers and his ability to put up a lot of points for Texas, I'm going to take Clemson plus the 12.
It's interesting that we're at, in the playoffs now, and this is where we are with Texas, that we're trying to figure out which quarterback that they should be using. We shouldn't be at that point at this point of the season. It should be one or the other. We shouldn't have to worry about this. So that's definitely, a concern. But even though Texas shoots themselves in the foot a lot of penalties on this Texas team, for me, like I said, I still think defensively they're going to be good enough to shut down Clemson. I don't think the 51.5, I think it's going to be under. I really don't think there's going to be a lot of points in this game. I think it's going to be well under that, but I think Texas is going to win. I don't know if they will be able to cover. That's a lot of points. I think that's with all these games. It's hard for me to really think that someone's going to get blown out. But I guess when we least expect it, that's when it happens. But I don't think it'll be in this game. I think this game's going to be pretty close. I think, especially like I said, Texas's defense is going to win them this game.
Yeah, the winner of this, obviously, Arizona State awaits them in the Peach Bowl. Let's move on. This will be the TJ After Dark special, and a game I'm very interested to see, Mac, because I don't know what to expect from the home team here. Tennessee at Columbus. They take on Ohio State. This will be the 4th of the first-round games, and right now, when you look at it, the line has pretty much held its point. 47.5 is the total. Ohio State favored by 7. I made this as part of my best bets last week. I think the defensive line for Tennessee is going to eat Ohio State for lunch. And the Buckeyes starting slow, the explosiveness of the Volunteer offense. Dylan Sampson is a guy that likely, if Tennessee could have gotten to this point with maybe one less loss, I think Dylan Sampson's a guy that's in the Heisman conversation. Rushed for 1,400 yards this year, 22 touchdowns. And Tennessee can bite you quick, and they can bite you early. And for Ohio State, if their defense doesn't show up to play, this is a big-time problem for the Bucs.
So it's just curious to me because, Chip Kelly is supposed to be this big innovator on offense, right? And I just don't see it with this Ohio State offense. I wish I could tell you this was mine, but I don't remember where I saw it this week. I wrote it down and I forgot to, I can't give credit because I don't remember who said it. But this kind of really wraps a lot of things up for me in this game. Who is Tennessee? Tennessee is Michigan, much like Michigan, built to run the ball. They're more polished, better offensive line, better running back, better quarterback. They're a more polished version of the Michigan Wolverines. I like that. That said a lot to me. What did Michigan do against Ohio State?
Just physically beat the hell out of them.
All right. So I'm just saying, when I saw that, and I wish I could give credit, I just don't remember. I just wrote it down. I saw it was one of those things. But that just made me step back and go, man, if that's 20% true, Ohio State's in a lot of trouble. They're in a lot of trouble in this game.
Yeah, I think this is a horrible spot for the Bucs for many of the reasons that we've talked about. And, we know this from the NCAA tournament. It's a coin flip anytime you get an 8-9 matchup, the NCAA basketball tournament, March Madness. It's a coin flip on the 8-9. I think you got a coin flip here. And I mean, the other thing, too, is how they had to go through the determining process of who was going to get the home game here. And again, I think it's bad break for Ohio State in this situation because this is a damn good Tennessee team. And again, Ohio State's slow starts is why I'm massively concerned here. I went ahead and took Tennessee on the money line because I think, Tennessee's defensive line, I think, is the major differentiating factor here.
What I saw in Ohio State in that Michigan game was, and this was the thing, they didn't trust Will Howard. He threw the ball 33 times, but most of those passes were under 10 yards. I mean, he wasn't throwing the ball, slinging that ball all around. That's why I said that the Chip Kelly thing just really confuses me at times. I'm going to be honest. I loved when he was in Oregon and all the things he did. The hurry up offense and everything. It just seemed like it was kind of special, and it's not with this Ohio State team. And I mean, is Will Howard hurt? Is that part of it? Was he not able to make those throws, or did they not trust him to make those throws? That's two big things. If he was hurt in that Michigan game and he wasn't able to make those throws because of something physical, that's one thing. But if it's the play calling because they didn't trust him, that's a whole nother story. And like I said, this is a better team than Michigan, even defensively. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about this game. If I'm an Ohio State fan, I'm worried about this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, too, with Tennessee is we talk a lot about their defensive line. Their secondary, which was something that was a concern going in to the season, their secondary has been just as good, too. I think if there's a place that you can kind of beat Tennessee's defense, I think it's at the second level. But, again, you just talked about Chip Kelly and what they were doing with Will Howard. And when you look at Howard's last handful of games, I mean, he only 175 yards against Michigan, 200 yards against Indiana. And granted, they were in control of that game against Indiana, but, 22 of 26 for 201. I mean, averaging 7.7. They're not pushing the ball down the field. Even Northwestern, when they were at Northwestern, the game at Wrigley Field, I mean, he only threw for 247. A pretty efficient game, but then the Penn State game, $182. And I'm highlighting some of these teams in Indiana, Michigan, like you've said, Penn State. Those are the better defenses that Will Howard's seen. This is the best defense he's seen all year, outside of maybe the Oregon game.
Right. I mean, and so this is really, really interesting to me. Like I said, we haven't heard that he's injured. Will Howard's injured. I didn't like their game plan. I'll be honest with you. I didn't like the Ohio State game plan against Michigan. To me, it seemed like they were trying to do something that almost like they played to lose that game. I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, when we talked about that, I mean, I don't think they did, but maybe they did want to go to that championship game. I don't know. I wouldn't put that on anybody. I mean, I'm just saying it just seemed like a weird game plan to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's going to be the game I think everybody wants to see. The winner obviously gets Oregon in the Rose Bowl. I think the road ends for whoever wins this game. But I think that for sure that Tennessee's defensive line is the factor. We got about less than an hour before kickoff from South Bend. 27 degrees is the estimated kickoff time temperature. Indiana, Notre Dame. And for Indiana, it's, hey, this is our second opportunity now on a big stage against a good football team to prove that we belong, and we just didn't beat up a soft schedule. And you know that that's exactly what they want to do under the Friday night lights. I mean, you couldn't have drawn up the opening kickoff game any better than that. And I like this matchup. I think we've got an interesting quarterback matchup with Riley Leonard and Curtis Rourke. Notre Dame likes to play a physical, dominant brand of football. That's their kind of MO. They're not going to wow you on offense. Indiana, they want to put up the points, and you got an 11-1 Notre Dame team and an 11-1 Indiana team, and I think this game is about as even as it can be.
I was kind of having a little bit of fun with this. This is called the Aretha Franklin game. It's like respect. I don't think either of these teams have gotten the respect that they deserve for this year. I mean, it's so funny. Everything that you read about Notre Dame, everyone's got to drop that one loss in there on them. You know, it's like let's get over it. I mean, this is a whole different team, and it's the same with Indiana. It's kind of like, you know, yeah, they're one big game that they had, they couldn't pull it through. So again, which one of these teams is whoever wins this game is going to garner, I think, a lot of respect in the football world, because it's almost one of those things that I think a lot of people don't think either of these teams. I mean, obviously somebody has to win, but it's one of those, is like, I don't think there's a lot of people that think Notre Dame can win this game. I don't think there's a lot of people that think Indiana can win this game. It's very, very interesting to me. Again, for Notre Dame, they like to run the ball. We know that. And I think that's going to be the key thing. I said this about the first game. I think tempo is important in this game as well. Indiana, very, very balanced offense. I think this is going to be a really low-scoring game. I don't think we're going to see a lot of points in this game. I think it's going to be a quick game, because I think teams are going to be running the ball, short passes. I think one or two scores can win this game.
Yeah, there's so many side stories to this thing too. They haven't played each other. They've only played once since 1959. It was 49-27 Notre Dame win in 1991. And with Indiana, they score 43.3 points a game. And their defense is very stingy. Really not a lot of people talk about their defense. Like, they're the definition of, we'll bend, but we're not breaking. You know,
they were the number one defense in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and that's saying a lot in that conference, because Oregon's defense very good, Penn State's defense very good, Ohio State's defense has been very good for the bulk of the season. And then you look at some of the other stuff too. First time that Notre Dame's going to have a Friday night game at home ever. It's the first time since 1990 somebody else is broadcasting, as we alluded to, other than NBC. Right. And I, you know, for Kirk Cignetti, the most improbable team, if you will, to borrow a line from ESPN, the most improbable team to get here. This is a good football team. This is going to be a really, really good game. And I said earlier that I think the SMU Penn State game, to me, is the most evenly balanced matchup. This is a game that is damn near impossible for me to kind of predict. I jumped on this one when I got Indiana at 8.5. I like the number there. I don't think, and you kind of just alluded to this, I don't think anybody wins this game by more than a touchdown. This is like a 20-17 kind of game to me.
I see this as like an old time football game. You know, I kind of like an AFC North kind of battle. You know, that's kind of how I see this game. I mean, both teams want to run, control a little tempo. You know, kick a field goal here. You know, maybe score. That's how I kind of see this game.
Yeah, and you know, we talk about where Notre Dame's been defensively. They've been one of the better defensive teams in the entire country. They've had a ton of injuries, 2 preseason All-Americans. One of those, Howard Cross III, is expected to come back on Friday night. That's a huge lift for them. And then what they've been able to do all season, like 10 of the Indiana's 11 wins were by 14 more points or more. And they only faced deficits in 3 games and only one time in the second half. Indiana's a front-running team. What happens if Indiana gets behind early? I don't think it changes much because, again, I don't think either one of us think this game is going to get out of hand. It's going to be close. And this is a great I love that it's on Friday night here in just about an hour. And we get a chance to see our first, like, what are the nerves like? This is a big deal. This is exactly what college football wanted. This is going to be a great way to see that right away.
Yeah, for me, this is honestly one of those. It's a coin flip for me. I really, really have a hard time deciding. I think who I want to win and who I think is going to win. I mean, it's one of those. I think Indiana should win this game. There's a part of me that thinks Indiana. It's kind of like the SMU thing for me. I'm like, Indiana's been really good. I don't think they've gotten the respect. And the same, for Notre Dame, I'm like, everyone picks on, their loss, their schedule, this, that, and the other thing. But this team has won 10 straight games. Their defense in 6 of their 7 games has allowed 14 or fewer points. This is a really darn good football team. I don't know. I got to get my coin and figure this one out because I'm really not sure.
Yeah, and I think the biggest matchup for me, the one I think that's going to tell us a lot, we know about Jeremiah Love, the running back for Notre Dame. He has been fantastic all year between Leonard, Love, and Price. That's the bulk of the Notre Dame offense. On the flip side, Indiana, whose defense we were just talking about, they lead the nation in fewest yards rushing per game allowed at 70.8, and 2.46 yards per carry is second in all of FBS. If Jeremiah Love gets loose, we see the difference in Notre Dame's offense. Again, with the 8.5 there, I like the number. I love this game's coming up here in just a little bit. Perfect for Friday night. Of course, the winner of this game awaits Georgia, and we don't know who Georgia's quarterback is going to be in that game. So I think both of these teams definitely have an opportunity here to make a little bit of a run, which then leads me to my question to put you officially on the clock, Mac. National championship game prediction. Putting it in pen, Sharpie it right now.
Got it right here. All right.
That's great. Why don't you tell us what it says since nobody can see it?
I know. My national championship game. Are you ready? Drum roll. I got Oregon. Oregon's coming out. They're going to beat, you ready for this? It's going to shock you, ASU. They're going to beat ASU. On the other side of the bracket, I got Georgia. I got Georgia and Oregon in the final. I got Oregon taking it home.
The final that everybody wants to see. Will we get there? That is the question. Oregon, definitely for me. I called this back almost a year ago in January. I'm not changing now. There's no reason to. I think Oregon defensively and offensively, this team is hell-bent all year. It's been one thing and one thing only, and that was winning this national title. The bottom side of the bracket is where it gets pretty interesting. You've got a potential of an SMU Boise. Penn State and Boise would be interesting. And as we just mentioned, the winner of the Notre Dame-Indiana game, I think, has a really good shot because we have no idea who the hell the quarterback's going to be for Georgia. That being said, we know Georgia's defense is good enough to carry them all the way through. Baltimore Ravens winning the Super Bowl with Trent Dilfer at quarterback. Right. I mean, let's call it what it is. Georgia's defense can get them all the way through. That being said, however, I'm not going to change what I said last week. I think it's Oregon, and I think it's Notre Dame in a championship game that will be one for the absolute ages. TJ's pick, obviously he's not with us today, a little under the weather. I'm going to go ahead and say that he would probably go with Boise, which is not a state, against screw it, Arizona.
Which is a state.
Which is a state. It is Arizona State, for those of you wondering out there, since apparently there's been a lot of logo confusion on certain networks of which logo is which. U of A, the University of Arizona, which is housed in Tucson, is not a part of this. Just wanted to make sure everybody understood that before we go forward.
Tucson's where you go to get EGs.
Jesus. Here we go. Here we go. If you hear any additional weird noises tonight, I'm coming off of a week-long move, obviously in a different studio today. So a little bit of echo. Cats are still adjusting. Dogs still adjusting. There's boxes all over the place. Couldn't find half of what I needed today. So if you're getting a little extra background sound effects, that's what they are. And I've got something else, Mac. And you're
Uh-oh.
just coming off of a move. Like, moving is a pain in the ass, dude.
I'll tell you, we moved a couple of months ago, and we still got boxes. You don't believe me? Just right here behind, there's a whole bunch of boxes there. I still trying to find. I again, like you, I look at it this way: it's like every day is Christmas because I go and find different things in a box and go, oh yeah, look, that's where that is.
I got to about an hour before we were set to record this Football Friday show. Again, you can follow us on all of our socials at Mike Arana Show everywhere, including Blue Sky, not on Snapchat because we just don't do Snapchat. But yeah, it's been crazy, man. And I couldn't find this cord. I couldn't find that cord. You know, it's been a pain in the ass. A lot more space for us. My fiance actually lost me in the house last night. Didn't happen to remember to check the bathroom, the shower, which is where I was because I was covered in dust from moving out of our old place. And she kind of freaked out. I'm like, hey, remember, we actually have double the size of space right now. So a lot of cool things coming up. I got to throw a shout out to before we get too far. I can't find my razor. That's why I have a hat on. I got to give a shout out to my realtor, Thomas DeVore. If you're moving to Arizona and you need a guy, I got your guy. He was fantastic for us. I mean, good dude, good friend. And if you're moving to Arizona, I got your guy. So just hit us up. Let's transition a little bit here, Mac, and let's take a look at the NFL. We've got some great games on Saturday. We're getting a nut cutting time, as I said in the Power Pyramid the other day. When we look at this, and we're going to focus on the NFC side of the playoff picture right now, and the NFC has been about as unpredictable as anything. Detroit gets the loss the other day. Detroit, Philly, 12-2. Minnesota also still 12-2. That division for Detroit is not settled yet. And I brought this up a few weeks back. When do the defensive line injuries start to catch the Lions? Do they? Who knows? Lions still have a game with San Francisco. Who in the hell knows what San Francisco is going to look like at that time? We've got some interesting stuff here. You've got 3 of the top 4 teams by record in the NFC, all in the NFC North. We had Green Bay, Minnesota, and Detroit. Now, I think we're kind of set up here for a wild, mad dash to the finish. Again, I predicted a couple weeks ago, the last game of the year is going to be Seattle and Los Angeles. From Los Angeles for the division title, winners in, losers out. But we got a mess in the NFC. We got top-heavy NFC, and then we've got whatever the hell else. And I can't remember, Mac, the last time that there was this many bad teams in the NFL. When you look at, like, on the AFC side, for example, 2, 4, 6 teams already eliminated from postseason contention. The NFC side, 3 teams. So you've got about a third of the league, Mac, already eliminated from postseason contention. And I know we're in week 16, but this year specifically, we've got a handful of really good teams and we've got a handful of really horrible teams.
Seems like we always had like more teams around like that 500 mark, and we don't have that anymore. You know, it just seems like you said, the bottoms kind of dropped out of these teams, and it's interesting to, you know, try to see why. I mean, I always go back on my old horse about, you know, young quarterbacks. We have so many young quarterbacks in the league. You know, is that the case? We have a lot of new coaches in the league as well. You know, is that the case? I mean, there's some places where there's some real disasters with coaches right now, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the off season. I'm worried about Detroit. It is a laundry list of who is not playing, and it continues to get longer and longer each week. And not that they're running out of steam, but at some point, you know, it's that, you know, next man up, next man up, next man up. There's no more men. I mean, right. I am truly worried. Not that I don't think Detroit can do it, but you can't lose this many quality players and still. I mean, the strength is to have those numbers. You know, it's just like we use the Dodgers in baseball. You know, the Dodgers use all these pitchers, all these players. It's great for the season, but when you get to the postseason, you got to have the arms. It's same with football. You know, you lose your running back, you lose your one of your best defenders, so on and so forth. I'm worried about Detroit right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot to worry. And I mentioned this in the Power Pyramid on Wednesday. Like, I distinctly like mark them into tiers. Our tier 1 is Detroit, Philly, Kansas City, and Buffalo. You can put them wherever the hell you want and fight over who's in what order. And then my second tier was like the Minnesotas, the Baltimores, and Pittsburgh, because we know they're good enough. We know they could get the job done, but there's still some question there. So when we break down the NFC playoff matchups, if they were to start today, Detroit would hold on to the top seed because of a tiebreaker over Philly in conference winning percentage. Detroit 8-1 in the conference, Philadelphia 7-2. So Philadelphia would be your 2 seed. Tampa Bay would be your 3 seed. Los Angeles would win the tiebreaker over Seattle based on head-to-head winning percentage. Obviously, that can change as we get into Week 18. And when you look at it, the Rams are 5-5 in the conference, and Seattle's 4-5 in the conference. 3-2 in the division for the Seahawks, 3-1 in the division for the Rams. So if we go top to bottom, you would have Philadelphia hosting Washington, and they play this weekend. Seattle would be the first team on the outside looking in. Then we get some really interesting matchups. Green Bay would travel to Tampa Bay, winners of the NFC South, and Minnesota at 12-2 would get a chance to go back to Los Angeles and take on the Rams. That Minnesota team really, really kind of mind-blowing. I mentioned this a few times on the pyramid. Like, I didn't know how confident I was in their offense. And then the last 2 weeks, it's been like Sam Darnold right back to how he was at the beginning of the year. We know defense travels, and we know that defense is damn good. And I think a Vikings-Rams matchup would be extremely interesting. You could also have the potential of a Vikings-Seahawks matchup, which that's another game on the docket, ironically, for this weekend. So the NFC is a whole giant mess of I don't know who the hell is going to come out of.
For me right now, and I said this a couple of weeks ago, the team that scares me the most is Philadelphia. And obviously, we talked a lot about them last week playing against Pittsburgh. They seem like, you got coaches screaming at each other. You got players screaming at each other, people calling other people out. It doesn't seem to really matter what's going on. This team is they have one of the best offensive lines in football. It just doesn't seem to matter. They're playing very, very well. But I want to throw this out to you because it's a team that we kind of have forgotten about. And they ran into the problem that the Lions are running into now, and that's Tampa Bay. We've kind of forgotten about Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay, remember, all these guys were out. And Mike, I didn't think you said this. What happens if they get those guys back? Oh, guess what? They're starting to get some of these guys back. And Tampa Bay was a pretty good team, and they've been a good team without a lot of their injured players. And all of a sudden, they're starting to, I'll say reload, but they're starting to get those guys back. Is this Tampa Bay team something that we should kind of maybe put a little star next to and kind of check them out over the next couple of weeks?
Tampa's an extremely dangerous team, and for quite a while in the pyramid this year, I had them, I think, as high as 4th. I mean, when they were healthy, obviously the loss of Chris Godwin's going to go a long way, but what drum was I banging all year? If Tampa wants to go somewhere, they need to get the running game established and get it moving. They did. In the addition to that, I said the other key to it is that Bucky Irving is the guy. Bucky Irving has made their offense so much more dynamic in what they can do. So I think that's a way they can soften a little bit of the blow, if you will, as they head to the postseason of Chris Godwin. And we know what Baker's capable of doing. When Baker's hot, he's one of the best quarterbacks in the entire league.
Right. And I'll tell you, the other Bay, Green Bay, I mean, they've all of a sudden, I'm on them a little bit.
Trying to get me in trouble here.
I am. I'm on them a little bit. I mean, I just watched with Josh Jacobs. The running game has been incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what they did in the playoffs last year. I mean, they went into Dallas. I mean, they should have, they could have beat San Francisco. I mean, that game was right there for them last year. I mean, everyone keeps saying this is a young team. This is a young team. This is a young team. Yeah, but you know what? They have some playoff experience already. They're not going to be threatened to going on the road if they have to go on the road. And I mean, I know we talked about quarterback and, I mean, how good is our quarterback? But listen, if they can run the ball with Jacobs like they have, and their defense is pretty darn good, I mean, Love doesn't have to be great. He's just got to be manageable.
Yeah, and the thing, too, that's hurt Green Bay is they're 1-3 within their division. But somebody's got to tip their cap to Jeff Hafley and the job he's done as their defensive coordinator. I mean, they beat the living hell out of Seattle in Seattle, which is not an easy place to do that. Forced a couple of really stupid passes from Geno Smith. They pounded them right away. And if you look at the rest of the schedule for the Packers, I mean, I don't know how much more they're going to move up. They do have the Saints this upcoming week. I believe that's Monday Night Football, right?
Yep.
And the Vikings on the road after that, and then they finish with the Bears. So I don't really see Green Bay moving up, but that's a dangerous team when their defense is on like it was. I mean, they're 2 games shy of the 5 seed, which is Minnesota. It's going to be hard to pass Minnesota. They're only a game clear of Washington right behind them. Washington, again, we'll talk about this in a second, huge game this weekend with Philadelphia. But after that, and then you've got Seattle at 8-6. You've got Atlanta. They're a mess at 7-7. The Cardinals haven't looked the same since they came off their bye. San Francisco is not officially dead yet, but, I mean, they're basically teetering on the brink right there at 6-8. They've got the Dolphins this weekend, the Lions, and then a game against the Cardinals. So I don't think you're going to see Green Bay move. And 6-seed Green Bay, 3-seed Tampa, that's kind of an interesting spot. Washington and Philly would be another interesting one. For me, preferably, I'd like to see Washington and Tampa and Green Bay and Philadelphia. I know those would be rematches, but I'd be very interested with those two specifically to go from week 1 matchups, which they both were with Washington and Tampa, and then Philadelphia and Green Bay, the game that was in Brazil. I'd love to see those again because neither any of those teams, any of the 4 of them are the same as they were in the beginning of the year.
Right. You know, it's funny. I wanted to talk about just for a second for Minnesota. Isn't it funny? You have a team that's 12-2 and people are bitching about the quarterback and everything else. I mean, it's just, I don't get it. I mean, they almost beat Detroit the first time. They only lost by a couple of points. I mean, it's I don't know. Something about that Minnesota team is interesting, but I'm not sold on Washington yet. Every time I watch them, it seems like they throw a dump out there.
Stop watching them.
Yeah, I can't. It's like I can't get behind them. I don't know what it is. I don't know.
Everybody in the DMV is screaming at their computers and their phones right now, saying, "Stop watching us! Stop watching us!"
You know, I mean, they almost beat Philly the first time, and Philly had to come back. I think they were down I think they scored 20 points like in the 4th quarter to beat them the first time. I mean, so again, I'm not 100% sold on Washington, but it's going to be interesting to see. For me, like I said, I like Philly. I think Philly's going to give Detroit a good run in this NFC. I'm keeping an eye on the 2 Bays as well. I think they could make some noise.
Yeah, and for Washington to finish out, you know, they've got the game we're going to talk about here in a second against Philadelphia, and then they've got a Sunday night game. God forbid, why is this on Sunday Night Football against the Falcons? And then they finish with the Cowboys. So Washington's in a good spot. I think the teams that are in right now, with the exception of what the hell happens in the NFC West, which the NFC West, just wait until the last game's done, then you'll get your answer, because trying to predict what's going to happen in the NFC West right now is, I mean, that's the amazing thing about the NFC West. San Francisco has looked absolutely horrible. They basically have to win out. They need Washington to pretty much lose out, and they need Arizona to basically lose out. It's going to take a miracle. But all you got to do is win that damn division. And they're not completely out of the mix yet. I think once they get Detroit on Monday Night Football, that'll probably be the final nail in San Francisco's coffin for the year. But let's get into a couple of these games. Let's start with the Saturday games in the NFL, which is going to take us over to the AFC side. And we know this. These are teams that are all kind of bouncing around and have to play in a couple of days after this. Let's start with the big one in Arrowhead, and Patrick Mahomes with the ankle injury. He is practicing. It's going to be, knowing Mahomes, I would be shocked if he doesn't play. Kansas City is still getting some pressure from behind. And you got a Texans team that you mentioned, Washington, and how they're frustrating for you to watch because they take a dump when you watch them. For Houston, it's kind of been the same thing for me this year. They had the running attack with Joe Mixon. He's closing in on 1,000 yards. Decent chance that he gets it. Maybe not Sunday, but in the next couple of weeks. Nico Collins at 850 yards, and he missed a month. We know what Houston can do. We also know that Houston's biggest problem this year compared to last year is keeping C.J. Stroud upright. Enter Steve Spagnuolo in the Chiefs defense, and they're going to do anything they can to make that very difficult.
It's kind of interesting that, we have to say this, but, Kansas City has to win this game.
Right.
They do. And it's like, Andy Reid would just love to say, hey, Patrick, just, sit this one out. We don't need this one.
Right.
We know they went on the road last year. I mean, is it really going to make that big of a difference for them? But, they'd rather play at home in the playoffs if they could. So it's it's interesting to see if Mahomes plays, how much he plays. They have that game like 2 days later or 4 days later against Pittsburgh, So you're going up against, a Pittsburgh off a defense that's pretty rough as well. And with, a 4 day difference in the NFL is nothing. I mean, that's going to be a big thing to see. So I think this is a big game for Kansas City, because you just don't know how that game in Pittsburgh is going to go. Just, it's not going to take much to re-injure that ankle. Ankles are, we know as old basketball coaches, ankles are not fun. It's the worst thing, one of the worst injuries you can have, really.
Well, let's do this for a second, though. Let's zoom out just a little bit here, because we've mentioned it a couple of times for those that have been living under a rock. We've got 2 games on Saturday. We've got the Texans and the Chiefs, and the Steelers and the Ravens. We'll talk about the Steelers and Ravens here in a second. Then on Christmas, which is 4 days later, as we've alluded to, we've got the Chiefs and the Steelers and the Ravens and the Texans. So what I'm asking, out of those 4 teams on the quick turnaround for all 4 of them, the NFL did this right. I mean, at least it's the same 4 teams making this turnaround. Which one of these 4 teams jumps out to you that's best set up for the quick turnaround? Because that's a very interesting dynamic. And we're not talking about games that don't matter. I mean, these 4 teams specifically very much jockeying for position. And the Ravens trying to catch the Steelers, the Chiefs trying to hold on to the number 1 seed, the Texans just trying to maybe not get into that first wild card game on Saturday, which is their customary spot. But which one of these 4 teams strikes you as a team that can go, home, road, doesn't matter. 4 days later, doesn't matter. Let's go strap up and let's play some football.
I think Baltimore, for me, it stands out with Lamar. I mean, and that offense. I mean, he can. If you got teams that are a little banged up, I look at teams that can put points on the board. Of those 4 teams, I think Baltimore can put points on the board. You're talking about defenses or offensive lines that are banged up. The ability with Henry to run the ball, with them, with the receivers that they have, I think it would set up perfect for Baltimore.
Well, and we'll look at this even to zoom out a little bit more. When you talk about this, and we've just mentioned, Kansas City's positioning and trying to hold off the Bills, and all the Bills have to do is pull even with them. That being said, there's only 3 games left for everybody. So the odds that Kansas City loses 2 games and Buffalo doesn't lose a single game, not likely. The team that has the biggest opportunity to make the massive jump in this grand scheme of things is the Steelers. Yeah. You beat the Ravens, you basically lock up the North, and then 4 days later at home, you get a Kansas City team that even if Mahomes plays on Sunday, what the hell is that ankle going to feel like 4 days later and having to travel? And obviously we don't have travel schedules, but I would imagine that Tuesday is when everybody's going to jump on a plane. So you're talking about Mahomes, if he plays, playing Sunday, jumping on a plane, and granted, it's not a super long trip from Kansas City to Pittsburgh, but again, with ankles, we know what happens. Pittsburgh can vault themselves here with a little hiccup from Kansas City into a really good spot. So when you look at Pittsburgh and Buffalo, they're both 7-2 in the conference. Strength of schedule is a slight advantage to Buffalo. But why does that matter? Well, because we could get that far down the tie-breaking scenario. Pittsburgh's only 1 game behind Buffalo. And you're talking about the difference of being the 2 seed and hosting the Chargers, or being the 3 seed and hosting the Broncos. And I do think there's a distinctly different position there in who you might want to play. I would rather play the Chargers than the Broncos if I was any of those teams. Again, it's the playoffs. Who gives a crap at that point? But Baltimore's also in a dangerous spot because they win a tiebreaker over Denver right now, but they both have identical records. So I think Pittsburgh's got the most to gain. And Mike Tomlin, in the way he does things, I think if there's one of these teams out of those four that can do that quick snap turnaround, all things considered, I think Pittsburgh's in the best spot, and Pittsburgh has the most to gain in the next basically 7 days, not even.
Yeah, I mean, I see that their defense has struggled a little bit the last couple of weeks. They haven't played great defensively. I'm worried a little bit about that. Still doesn't look like they're going to get their wide receiver back with his hamstring injury, if that's what they're going with again with that again this week. So we'll have to wait and see. But you're right. I mean, we know we're going to get that Pittsburgh Baltimore game. We know that's your basic NFC North game, and and I mean it'll be interesting to see how Pittsburgh responds. I mean, this is their little gauntlet. Buffalo had their gauntlet earlier in the year. This is the Steelers' gauntlet right here to see what they can do. The worst thing is, they could lose these 3 games, and that puts them in another position as well. So I mean, like you said, this is an important week, 7 days, 10 days in the NFL, especially in the AFC.
Yeah, absolutely. The second game, we've talked about both of these teams, Steelers and Ravens. Ravens at home, a 6-point favorite, and the over-under is right around 45.5. And again, we know this. We've talked about it a lot. AFC North games are about as unpredictable as possible. I really do like this spot for Pittsburgh, with or without George Pickens. The thing with the Ravens, I've said it all year, their passing defense, not very good. Can Pittsburgh slow down Derrick Henry? We saw how frustrated he was the first time they played against Pittsburgh, the early fumble, and Pittsburgh was in control of that game the whole time through. For Baltimore, obviously a win gets us into some tie-breaking scenarios down the stretch here. And this dynamic, and again, hats off to Roger Goodell and the NFL schedule makers. I mean, you're giving us the same 4 teams in the same 4-day rest. So everybody's playing on a level playing field there.
Right.
I think this is going to be interesting. I like the resolve of the Steelers team. They haven't played great on defense as of late, but I think the prize that's there for Pittsburgh, you can win the North if you win this game, and you've got a shot to at least get to 2, and depending on what the hell happens, maybe get to 1. And that's the thing is Kansas City lost their game to Buffalo, so Buffalo can pull even with them, and they have the tiebreaker. Pittsburgh gets that tiebreaker. It's the same scenario for both of those teams chasing Kansas City. I love Pittsburgh in the spot. I really do.
Well, I'm hoping, that I'm hoping they can pull it out. I love watching the Pittsburgh Baltimore games. I mean, it's just one of those things. They're fun games to watch. Both coaches are, really animated. It's going to come down to a field goal with one of those teams. And I think our kicker's a little bit better than theirs so far this year.
Yeah. If his leg doesn't fall off from overuse, that'd be the only thing with Chris Boswell. Let's flip to the NFC side, go to Sunday. Washington and Philly, we mentioned it earlier. The 9-5 Commanders at home, 12-2 Eagles. We didn't know what to expect last week from the Eagles, with all the infighting and reports that came out. Didn't seem to faze them one bit. I think Washington's got a hell of a chance to win this game right here. I like the spot for the Commanders, but they've got to step up to the table, and this is the game that everybody wants to see them win. Like, hey, how good are you? You talked about it just a few minutes ago. How good is this Washington team? What are we getting with this Washington team? When does this Philadelphia team crack? Who knows? Maybe they don't, and it galvanizes them. I'm watching them like a freaking hawk right now to see what happens, because I believe that they are going to crack, and it's going to cost Nick Sirianni his job.
I know, and I mean, you keep it's like. It's like getting ready to watch 2 cars crash. You can't take your eyes off of it. You're waiting for, it's like NASCAR, right? We'll wait for the crash to happen. And that's what we're waiting for. But like you said, Philadelphia, they win this game. They still have a game. They have a chance to catch Detroit. I mean,
Right.
so they've got that chance that this game actually means something. When I was first looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe this is the week that Philadelphia maybe takes their foot off the gas a little bit. They're in pretty good shape. Do they need this game? Nah, they don't. But they actually do. They actually need this game, and so it's going to be very interesting to see. What a sell job this is going to be if Philadelphia ends up going and beats Philly and then somehow ends up getting ahead of Detroit. Because like we said, I'm a little worried about Detroit with all the injuries. One thing I love watching about Philly, and I hated watching it against the Steelers, but this offensive line is phenomenal. And that's how you win Super Bowls. Your offensive line wins you Super Bowls. And this Philly offensive line is good enough, is way good enough to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, Landon Dickerson questionable. It's going to be interesting to see if he ends up playing on Sunday. We don't know as of right now if he's in or out, but yeah, between Dickerson and Mailata, and that Philly offensive line. I mean, here's the thing too. If you think about what Philly does, how many times has Saquon Barkley lost touchdowns inside the red zone at the goal line and stuff like that? I mean, we'd be talking about Barkley being a hands down, no doubt about it, MVP candidate here without some of that. I'm going to save my pick on this because it is part of my best bets, which is coming up here shortly for us. But I'm very interested to see this matchup. 26-18 was the final score the first time they played it. And again, with Washington, they went through that stretch. So they lost by a point to Pittsburgh. They lost by 8 to Philly. And then that rando-ass weird game against Dallas that they lost to 8. So we're talking about a whole different ball game here. A couple of bounces go their way. And if we get the Washington team that we saw against Pittsburgh, that's the Washington team that I think can pull this off and get a big signature win. So that's where I'm going. You got a pick?
I like Philly in this game. I really do. I mean, I don't think there's anything stopping them. I think the carrot to be the number one seed is going to be enough to overcome, coaches. It's funny. Here's Philly. What other team do you know the security guy's name besides Philadelphia? You don't. That's how weird this Philadelphia team is. It's a soap opera. They're going to win this game.
It very much is. Let's go to the next feature game in the NFC. It's Minnesota in Seattle. Could be a matchup we see in the playoffs. 12-2 Minnesota. Again, that offense has been rolling. Vikings about a 4.5 point favorite, over under about 42.5. The Seahawks coming off of a miserable, disgusting, horrible performance on Sunday Night Football where they got punched right in the freaking jaw right away. And it's a little bit different dynamic with Minnesota. Aaron Jones isn't Josh Jacobs, but he's had a really good year. He's going to cross 1,000 yards this weekend. Geno Smith, 14 touchdowns and 13 interceptions, and that's what it comes down to for Seattle. Kenny Walker also looks like he's probably going to miss another game. Jackson Smith and Jigba has been fantastic for the Seahawks this season. Minnesota's rolling right now, and as we've talked about, defense travels. I don't know what to make of this game because I don't know what Seattle team's going to show up.
Yeah, I know. And if, Geno Smith, one thing that he's not good at is that he is not good against the blitz. What is one thing that Minnesota is good at? Bam.
Blitzing like hell.
They come at you. And so I think this is right off the bat, this is a tough matchup for Seattle. I know Smith, it's even questionable if he's going to play in this game. We still don't know. I think this is, again, all these Minnesota doubters are going to get another wake-up call. I think whether Smith plays or not, I think this is a Minnesota team that themselves are putting themselves in a pretty good spot in the playoffs. This is if Donald again plays well. Again, I keep saying this, but I don't think he has to play great. If he plays well, this Minnesota team's going to travel themselves pretty far come playoff time. Yeah,
and another big thing to keep an eye on for Seattle, I'm pretty sure that Geno is going to end up playing, but when you look at the rest of their stuff, Noah Fant, questionable. He's banged up. Ernest Jones, which would be a catastrophic loss for the Seahawks because since they got him, he's been fantastic. DK Metcalf, questionable. Metcalf's typically questionable all the time, usually ends up playing. And Zach Charbonnet, who's been fantastic for the Seahawks, especially with Kenny Walker out, he's also dealing with a couple of things. So That's going to be something to keep an eye on if you're looking at it from a betting standpoint. I question what we're going to get in the quarterback position, even if it is Sam Howell for Seattle. Like, what are we going to get out of the Seahawks offense?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this one, I'm Minnesota all the way. I'll take. I mean, I'll lay whatever points they're laying. But I think Minnesota wins this game. I think it's going to be another rough football day for Seattle.
Yeah, and that, a loss here for Seattle could be catastrophic in their chase for the Rams. Mm-hmm. But, who knows what we're going to get out of the NFC West, as we've said a million times over. All right, it is that time where we go off the rails. Doesn't do it justice when we get to our best bet segment. I don't know if Mac is in junior college football's bowl games this week or whatever the hell. So the floor is yours, Mr. Vegas.
Mike, I just wanted to say, I'm not going to tell you that I went 4-0 last week. Not going to tell you that I went 4-0 last week with my FCS picks.
Nobody wants to hear when we go 4-0. They only love to jump us when we go 0-1.
I know. But I was happy with that. That was good. So what I'm not going to tell you this week is that I'm not going to take undefeated and number one Montana State minus the 7.5 over South Dakota. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to give you that as one of my picks. I'm also not going to take the two-time defending champ North Dakota State. I'm not going to take them. And and that means I'm not either going to take South Dakota minus the 2.5, and I'm not going to play the under at 47.5. I wouldn't do that to you 2 weeks in a row, Mike. But you know what? You know what's coming up, Mike? Let me tell you.
Now he's got props. Here we go. What the?
Here we go.
Is that?
I got some Christmas gifts for you guys. Mike, Merry Christmas. Here's one of my Christmas presents just for you. The Hawaii Bowl, the night before Christmas, right? Here we go. Who doesn't want to be in Hawaii on the night before Christmas? I'm taking San Jose State minus the 3.5 against South Florida. And this one's for our boy TJ. Yeah, he's not here today. But listen. Oh, wait. I'm going to go the Game Above Sports Bowl. Pittsburgh. I know they've been talking about a team in the dumper. They've lost their last 5. For TJ, my present to him, I'm going to play the under at 51.5. And Mike, my final gift to you with all my heart, right in your backyard, Phoenix, the Rate Bowl. I'm taking Kansas State minus the 7. Merry Christmas.
Props. Jesus. Oh, my Lord.
Not the Titanic. This is not a sinking ship.
It might be. It might be. I'm going to stick in the NFL with my best bets. Obviously, last week I gave you one, Tennessee on the money line. I love that play. I've actually bet it a couple of times. I could tell you every line movement on the money line for that game. I'm going to stick with the NFL, though, and I'm going to take the aforementioned Steelers plus the 6.5. Not going to take the money line here. I might sprinkle that on the own side kind of thing. But for the purpose of the best bets, I'm going to take them plus 6.5. I am taking the Washington Commanders on the money line at home against Philadelphia. Right. As much as Philadelphia needs a win and needs to keep pace, I also think Washington knows exactly what they need to do to keep pace and make sure they get to the playoffs. And getting to the playoffs in Jay Daniels' first year, I think is monumental for them. But I'm not done because I like things some threes. That's why when I coached, we tracked up threes like they were going out of style.
Absolutely.
I'm taking the New York Jets. My Jets that we talked about earlier this year are an absolute dumpster fire. They're a disaster. They're a train wreck. They're everything you want to put in there. A shit show. We can keep going down adjectives. That being said, the Rams have been hot. They got the big win against Buffalo. They got they've won the games that they've needed to win, and they've been impressive. That defensive line, very impressive. Now you're asking them off of this hot run in the position that they're in to go all the way across the country and play a bad Jets team that really has nothing to play for other than pride. And if you've watched the Jets, doesn't necessarily look like they have any of that. I know it's out there. It is a risk. I'm betting on the damn Jets, the goddamn Jets. But we're going to do it anyways. You put those three together, it comes out to a plus 1,068. You can do the math from there. The goddamn Jets. I think I like the spot for the Jets because I think they're going to be able to do a little bit from the defensive side. I don't know what the hell we're going to get out of their offense. Aaron Rodgers could find his ass on the turf more times than even remotely possible in your brain because of how good that it's a horrible, horrible spot in December for the Rams to be going all the way across the country to take on this Jets team. So that's where I'm rolling with that one. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
Man,
Mac.
I'm shaking. I don't even. You threw me off on that. The Jets. Wow, crazy.
I think it's more the spot for the Rams than anything. I really do think it's a shitty spot for the Rams. And we talked about the Rams and their positioning. We know they have that last game of the year against Seattle that very well could be for the division. They've got this game against the Jets. They've got a game at home against the Cardinals. So they go at Jets, Cardinals, Seahawks to finish. I mean, the Rams got some work to do, and there's a lot of people that think they could. I think it's a horrible spot for the Rams. I really do, as bad as the damn Jets are.
Crazy. Hey, how about we go watch some playoff football?
That sounds real damn good. The beers are cold. We're getting ready to have somebody other than NBC broadcast a game from South Bend. Vegas, do you have any final words before the greatest damn Saturday and weekend of football we've probably seen in a long time?
This is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be fun for a while to not worry about all the negative stuff that we've been hearing with football, with all the stuff in the portal and all that other junk that's going on. No one's going to really care about who made it or who didn't make it. Once the games start getting played, that's all that we really care about. And this is going to be a fun time. And then I can't wait to start talking about the next round. I mean, that's the fun part of this. It's like it keeps going. We get another round after this to figure it out. It's gonna be fun.
And we will do that next Friday on Moss Football Friday. We'll have TJ back. We'll talk about the second round of the college football playoff, where Arizona State, Boise State, Georgia, and Oregon get back into the mix in your traditional bowl games. I can't friggin' wait. For TJ, who's not with us this week, he'll be back next week. For Vegas Mac, I'm Mike. We're out.